With more than 430 restaurants in 32 states, Cici's has been ranked by CNN Money as the #1 casual dining pizza chain in America. It's also been named by Technomic as the #2 most kid-friendly chain, as voted by millennial moms. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with David Roberts, the CIO of Cicis, and he's going to talk us through how Cicis went through the pandemic and what it is to manage technology during such a crisis situation. David, could you start us off a little bit by maybe first explaining what is the role of the CIO?
Well, Tim, first of all, thank you. I appreciate you having me on today and being a representative for Cicis. The essence of my role as CIO for Cicis, I think the best way to put it is that it's to guide Cicis through the digital transformation. And what does that mean? Well, it means several things, obviously. Ensuring we have a solid data architecture, solid infrastructure, both corporate and at the restaurant level, to ensure that we have those opportunities. The other thing would be providing real data insights to our business and to our franchisees to drive sales, cut food costs, and build those labor efficiencies.
Can you maybe set the stage for us before the pandemic kicked off? Kind of where were you from a technology perspective? What was the situation? What kind of initiatives were you working on?
Sure. Uh, Before the pandemic, we were actually in a really good spot. We had started the year strong. We had a good, sound plan ahead of us. We were building momentum. Uh, One of the biggest things I think we had going for us is we had gotten about halfway through a POS rollout. And that includes a back office. We were implementing that in combination with onboarding our online ordering solution. So we had loaded up 190 stores with in-store POS. It was a cloud-based POS. Um, and then right behind it, probably about 2 or 3 weeks, what we would do is we would onboard them onto the online ordering platform. And it was a tightly coupled integrated solution between our two vendor partners, Olo and NCR. So we had made a lot of progress. We had also addressed some challenges. Everybody's got challenges when they're doing a big rollout such as that. And we were in a good place. We had we were building momentum. We were working on infrastructure refresh. We were working on a redesign of our data architecture within our organization. And the reason we were doing that at the same time is because with that integrated solution, we were also looking at modifying our BI platform, making it better suited to utilize those API services as well as any and all other integrations that come, with today's solutions.
Integration has actually been such a difficult part of the restaurant technology stack. There are so many disparate providers, and the industry at whole is largely franchised. So it makes it challenging for vendors to be motivated to actually bring forth, these very well packaged and mature APIs. How have you been able to kind of navigate those waters? How do you put the stack together?
So that's a good question. And like you said, they're not all very sound APIs. I think, well, one of the things, I did when I first came on board was stress the importance of having a strong data architecture. And in order to do that, you need sound individuals, building that architecture. And I brought in Venu Kancharla, and he had a past experience of doing a lot of work with, our third-party aggregators, doing those type of integrations with a prior restaurant company. And to utilize his talents and his abilities proved, very fruitful for us, because not only did we use Venu, but we also had a third-party partner on as far as building out our new BI platform, and tying those two things together, I think set us up for success, because we had both the talent, the ability, as well as, the solution making is what I call it, to drive those better solutions, and to even help our vendors out, where they struggled. I think us having that type of expertise in house really helped things.
Let's get into the pandemic. It surprised everybody. There was almost no warning, and overnight you were suddenly blocked from going into the office. Can you talk about Cece's experience? How did you experience the pandemic? How did you respond?
Well, I think like everybody else, we were in uncharted waters, right? We were getting ready, we were gearing up for one of our big sales areas of the year, which was spring break. And for CC's, that's a big time of the year for us to drive a lot of sales. Um, you know, we were when it first hit, we had to assess what's going on. How are we going to? What are the first things we need to do? Not necessarily as a technology team, but as a leadership team first, and then the technology could support that. And so we had a sound leadership team with both Jeff Hetzel, our COO, Richard Peabody, our CFO, as well as, and ultimately Bill Mitchell, our CEO. They provided a lot of good guidance as far as setting the stage, making sure that we were upfront, we were making sure that we were there for our franchisees, communicating, on the hour, every time, every day things were changing, right? It was always day to day. Things were evolving, state by state. Things were changing, and it was how did we message clearly and communicate and keep those lines of communications open. So I think that's one of the first things we did. The other thing is we then had to put our strategy around that, right? What is our pivot? How do we, because obviously the initial initiatives that we had for the year um, had to, had to be modified, let's say. And that's where we had to take time and, regroup and then march forward.
One of the big challenges with the restaurant industry is that it is heavily franchised, and not all franchisees are the same. There are some that are very have a thriving business, and then there are others that are just making it day by day. And they're all independent business owners. They're all empowered to make their own decisions. How do you help a franchise system navigate a crisis like a pandemic?
Lots of conversations, right? Making sure you're available, talking them through, their questions, helping. We didn't have the answers either. Not at first, but cumulatively, we eventually got there, got to a good place. I don't know that we ever totally got there. I don't know that anybody totally gets there, but we got to a good place in order to support our franchisees. And like you made a good point, it was day by day, right? Things were changing so quickly, and then how did we modify our technology to suit that, right? We had to build dynamic solutions. We had to think that way as to, all right, what something could change tomorrow that could affect, what we put in place today. And that was what guided us.
Now, one of the interesting things about CC's is that your leadership is also your franchisees. Can you speak to how that sensitivity kind of colored the response and the decision making that took place at corporate?
Sure. Yeah, we have the unique situation where our president and our president COO, Jeff Hetzel, is not only the president, but he's also a two-store franchisee. And he provides some interesting insights, on a regular basis, but particularly in this situation because there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of uncertainty, and stores are closing, and people are, very stressed about the financial aspects, not only from a corporate but every franchisee, the families. And Jeff provided an interesting perspective. One, because he knows all the franchisees. He's been in the system for 30 years. And then that coupled with, his ability to look forward had really helped us. And by looking forward, doing the analysis on the P&Ls, understanding what we need to do he would basically lay the groundwork for himself, and then we would figure out how do we apply that to the rest of the organization to help them, whether it be through the PPP, submitting as far as the SBA loans, or, how does the operations change? What do we do during this change in operations? and then I would come behind it and say, all right, how do we leverage our technology differently in order to support that change? So all of those things together is what really provided a unique perspective from, or I think gave us a little bit of an advantage.
Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of team you have at CC's and what their respective roles were in responding to the crisis?
Sure. Got a great team. Uh, it's a small team, a little bit smaller now, but I think that's expected. But I like to think they're all SMEs in their own rights. They're very very knowledgeable. They care a lot about each other as well as our franchisees, as well as the Cicis organization, and I think that's very very important. Um, Chuck Taylor, he's our network and infrastructure engineer. John Tilton, he's our data security and network engineer. Ashley Winan, she's head of, she manages support as well as our store restaurant systems. And Banu Kancharla, he's our data architect. Now, Bianca Barry as well as Adam Montgomery also roll into Ashley's team. So we've got a very dynamic team. That covers all the aspects, right? Your network, your infrastructure, your architecture, your store systems, your store support. There's a lot of things that go into that, and they do a very good job of helping each other while making sure that they're providing the necessary expertise from their perspective.
If we can, let's just take a quick survey of the various technology elements in a restaurant. I'd like to start with cybersecurity. Breaches during the pandemic become a big issue. How do you think about cybersecurity, and kind of what practices do you have in place?
Sure, cybersecurity is a big thing now. From the restaurant perspective, to answer your question first, from the restaurant perspective, when we were rolling out this POS, and like I said, we're about halfway rolled out. We paused during COVID, but the infrastructure, there was a lot of time spent by John, Chuck, and the team to ensure we had a strong infrastructure built that had tight security, tight network capabilities, whether it's our firewalls or processing payments through EMV, our overall PCI compliance level of compliance, or our scope, right? What advantages could we build into this system while we're building this new solution? It wasn't just a POS rollout. Obviously, when you do a POS rollout, a lot of times you got to change the architecture. Well, there's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of architecture changes, and they were made to reduce our security risk. From a corporate standpoint, we also implemented an SIM solution called Darktrace. We felt like that was another gap that we had from an organization that we needed to implement, and John spearheaded that. I mean, he's really been significant as far as our guidance from a security standpoint, both at the corporate and the restaurant level.
It's impressive what you're doing. We're in a season where the industry is largely non-compliant with PCI requirements, and you've gone above and beyond that to not only just meeting the basic core requirements, but even applying machine learning kind of techniques to understand when the threats are coming and to be able to respond in real time. Can you talk a little bit about your use of the cloud? Where does the cloud fit in your strategy, or does it have a role today?
The cloud does have a role. Obviously, our POS system is a cloud-based POS, so let's start there, right? So there's a lot of advantages, especially today, because you can get to it from anywhere. Uh, that's very important. Our BI platform is also another cloud-based platform. Now we are a Microsoft shop, but we're leveraging Azure and AWS and all of those platforms to service our data. Ultimately, it provides the flexibility, right? You asked about the APIs earlier. Well, obviously that provides a competitive advantage if you can utilize it and utilize those tools, those API tools, that help you connect very quickly, right? It's all about how quickly can you implement a solution and dynamically can it work And then you get back to the integration piece and ultimately the data insights. And all of those things work together, but the cloud has really been beneficial because, one, we pull our data from an API from our cloud POS all day, every day, right? So you're getting real-time data insights. That's first and foremost. Then you're leveraging it on your BI platform, and then you're integrating it with your your other vendors, whether it's the food safety or guest surveys or guest complaints or uh, all of those different type of tools that we use in the restaurant industry in order to get a good snapshot, a clear picture of what your business is doing on a day-to-day basis.
When it comes to using the cloud, the very next question is bandwidth and just access to the cloud. How much bandwidth does a restaurant need?
Good question, and it's a tricky question because and I think you and I've spent a lot of time talking about this actually, but it depends on what you're doing within the restaurant. Now, from a cloud POS that we have, that actually does not require much. However, you've got the different things within a restaurant that restaurants need to utilize in order to be effective, right? And you have your security cameras, you have your some people have back office. Now we obviously don't necessarily have a physical back office, but it's cloud-based POS, so cloud-based back office, you can get to it from anywhere. Um, it's it's interesting, but you don't. We recommend you get as much as you can afford within up to let's say 100 meg, or you don't necessarily need to kill the cow on it, but you need to have something sufficient enough in order to access the system effectively. A lot of people like to provide the guest Wi-Fi services. You have your firewalls that are, applying your PCI template policies and, funneling that. And obviously, you segment your networks. We've got our credit cards over here. We've got our guest Wi-Fi over here. Our camera systems are on a DMZ. Those types of things. So, in order to do all of that, you need some sufficient bandwidth. And so, fortunately, most of our locations are in a good spot and have the ability to get that bandwidth. But then others aren't. That's where Hughes comes in. That we utilize people like you to provide those additional solutions.
What's interesting about the restaurant industry is that when it comes to like backup, they look at it as a nice to have, and they try to minimize the infrastructure. What's your perspective on backup, the LTE? Is it a nice to have? Or is it a requirement in this day and age?
I think backups. If we're and make sure I understand your question. Are we talking about from a DR standpoint?
Yeah, like when you have it be another connection into the restaurant. It's been viewed commonly as a luxury. When I talk to restaurateurs, in many cases, hey, it's enough to have a connection. I've got to minimize my operational costs. It's to your point, you buy as much. I've already spent as much as I can on the primary connection. Do I really need to go and invest in a backup? And it seems like that's another investment that is questionable in terms of its value to the business.
Um, It's a tricky question, and I think everybody, every company, it depends on your overall architecture, right? How have you set it up? From CC standpoint, we chose to utilize a firewall that has a cellular backup stick.
Mm.
So, and that actually provides us the ability to be up 99.9% of the time. And it's very rare that backup, isn't sufficient. Now, there are places that may not have strong cellular service, and we deal with those as one-offs. But the large majority of our people, of our restaurants, utilize that cellular backup. And then what you do, the key about that is making sure that you have close monitoring of those systems so that you can keep that uptime, right? So we work with our third-party help desks. We have tools in place in order to, every morning, like just this morning, I get an email that says, hey, so-and-so, we've got 2 stores that failed over to backup last night. So immediately the process is they create a ticket, They call the store in the morning when they get there. They troubleshoot to try to get it off of cellular backup. If they can't, then they instruct them that, hey, there's probably an issue with your ISP. Let's call them. Let's work through that solution and get you back off of the cellular backup. And those processes around the redundancy have been critical to our uptime.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do offline, like credit card and payment transactions, but mobile orders and the like, or curbside pickups, that doesn't work without a backup, without some kind of connectivity. There's no such thing as an offline to kind of mobile order. You had mentioned analytics a little bit earlier. Can you talk a little bit about the analytics strategies? What kind of data is most meaningful to kind of improving the restaurant operations?
Sure, and I think that's when I referred a little bit to the BI platform that we developed, the cloud-based BI platform with our partners at RAD. You know, the biggest thing when I came in is I wanted to find out, all right, we're not talking to you. We don't have all these pieces of data talking to each other, right? And we don't have a clear view of what does that look like? What do we need to make decisions off of? You know, and I'm sitting, it's not very fun when I'm sitting in a meeting with the executive team and Bill's asking me across the table saying, why can't I see this data? Why can't we make decisions based on, you know, this data? And so that's not a, that's kind of a, that's a no-win for me. I've got to solve that. And so that's what we did. We implemented that. And what it also provides you is the ability to send out that data to your restaurants as well, to provide them additional insights above and beyond your POS or your back office. It's providing them a dashboard, right? Those dashboards are critical to the success now of our businesses, and it helps decision making so much more quickly and efficiently. You know, if somebody had a bad OSAT score, and then their sales were down, you know, looking at those tendencies and reading in between the lines, and then having operational, they now have a tool to utilize, and giving our field teams the ability to coach the right things to drive better quality or drive more profit or drive better cost efficiencies.
This is tremendous. And when you think about a franchise system, as a franchisor, it's very difficult to tell franchisees what to do. It's probably far more effective to show them what they need to do and let them come to the conclusions of what are the right things for their business. You know, you have a very impressive technology stack for your restaurant. And then with the pandemic, you know, there was a sudden immediate need to implement more online order throughout the system, more curbside pickup. Can you talk a little bit about the execution of big technology projects in very abbreviated short amounts of time?
Sure. I'll give you a great example. The pandemic, you know, brought this to light very quickly. When I said we have to pivot quickly, but we have to make dynamic solutions that work. That's a really good example. When we had to stop our POS rollout, we also had stopped our online ordering rollout. So we were in 190 stores. We were now, you know, Cici's is a restaurant company. It's, you know, the ultimate pizza buffet, right? So 85% of our customers are dine in. Well, they can't dine in. They still want the pizza. How do we get it to them, right? And we only had 190 stores on our online platform. Now, people were utilizing third party, but we needed to be able to get to that other 190 and quickly. And so we changed our strategy. Sometimes, you know, there's different reasons that you go with certain strategies, but we went with a non-integrated approach because it was vital to the health of our system. We needed to drive additional sales, especially since our restaurants were closed and they were only able to do takeout. So Ashley's team spent a lot of time together with the marketing team, Josh Loynette, the director of digital, and they put together a great solution, a non-standardized solution, and we've been rolling it out ever since that. I want to say that first week of May. We built it out in about a month, and by the first week of May, we were rolling out, and we're now into, I want to say, 97% of our stores. and that's been critical to our health of our system.
That is a remarkable strategy, right? Because you don't typically see IT taking a new solution. The ordinary playbook would be to take whatever technology you have and just try to ram it through for the rest of the system. But you've demonstrated an incredible agility here, where it's already implemented, you don't fix what's not broken, and then where it's not implemented, you've embraced other solutions so that you can have additional flexibility and probably speed to getting out to market too as well. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean that was, yeah. Just to add one more thing, that was obviously that was a critical piece of it, right? How do we prevent more angst in the system? Because now, so part of the non-integrated piece of that you do need some type of tablet or some type of technology to access those ordering dashboards, right? But most everybody has that ability in their restaurants. So we felt like that was minimal to the overall impact it could have on the benefit it could drive these restaurants in the interim.
so with what you've been through this past year, how are you thinking about the next steps for CCs? How's it reshaped kind of your perspective on technology strategy and the design of your tech stack and your kind of next set of initiatives?
Well, I'm probably pretty stubborn, so I felt like we had a good strategy going into COVID. I feel like we'll continue to push that strategy, but it also taught me that you you need to be a little bit more flexible. You need to figure out how can we pivot? How can we make such a dynamic solution that may be more beneficial more quickly for the system, but at the same time you've got to measure, what's the impact, what's the end impact, right? What are we exposing? Anything? Are we exposing any breaches in security or things of that nature, right? That if we're going to be doing these alternate solutions, let's call them, it's very important that we're addressing those concerns first, because we're not going to sacrifice the security of our franchisees and our overall system for a quick solution. It just doesn't make sense. But we do find that if we spend a little bit more time, we're finding a little bit more middle ground.
David, thank you. Thank you very much for talking about this. Yeah, it's a tough situation. It's for the entire industry, but it's so helpful to hear a case study, to be able to understand how you can navigate these kinds of situations from where you were before to kind of where you are now and kind of what the future looks like. And for our audience, I wanted to invite you to continue the conversation with us. We're providing our email addresses and our LinkedIn. We invite you to ask your questions. There's so much that we can learn from each other. Thank you, everybody, for participating in our session.